morning. Welcome to BCube Sunday morning. I am, and if you don't like my lighting, you're going to have to blame God. He changed the rotation of the earth a little bit so that my natural lighting has now changed, and I got to reconfigure my office. But good news for all of you. It's BCube Sunday morning, and we got Jim Wright, and soon to be joined by Karen G. Anderson, who, when she comes back, just a reminder that she has won a prominent award for her website design for her Mr. Tippy, the cat website. And she is also the editor of the Southern Truths, which is a interesting book that if we haven't offended the people by selling it on Amazon, we're certainly going to offend the people by how we describe some Southern elements, because we're honest. So that said, before I let Jim get into his first rant, because I know he's got a good one lined up with all the all the generals in the news. You know, General Mattis lives 6 blocks from me, and I'll tell him you said hi. Yeah, he knows you though. I think. But no, I don't mean to make fun of it, but when him and my wife were in high school, they called him Little Jimmy. Anyway, but we have the award-winning cat webpage designer. I mean, in light of a world of childless cat ladies, we have Karen. Now, Karen, tell us very briefly what you did to earn this award.
I adopted a cat that got lost in the ceiling for 3.5 weeks. And I used to tell the story about this. The story involves 4 people getting bitten, insurance agents, a federal judge, 2 witches. It's really exciting. And I used to tell the story at parties. And someone said, you ought to write that down. So I made a website called mrtippy.com, mrtippy.com. And I wrote the long tale of Mr. Tippy. And I belong to the Cat Writers Association because I used to write about cats for rover.com. And I noticed they were having a contest, and I entered the story of Mr. Tippy in their entertainment section. And I just won their first place medallion last night for the story. And I went up to tell Mr. Tippy that he had won, and I couldn't get him out from under the bed.
Well, Mr. Tippy is glad to have you for his cat mommy.
He survived. He's still with us, and it was 10 years ago that he got stuck in the ceiling.
Well, better than being stuck on the ceiling.
Yes,
that's true.
Yes.
Well, and we have with us the one and the only writer of Antipodes and Trump at Gettysburg.
Oh God, please.
Come on. I hired 2 actors to read that.
That's true. You did. That's right.
And they cracked 6,000 views in just a couple of hours.
Yeah.
And it was a fun time. Someday I'm going to get Karen to slap that on the website.
Yeah, those were more innocent days when we could mock Trump for how he talked and those sorts of things before we realized just how horrible he was. And so nowadays I don't do a whole lot of that sort of humor, but it was funny stuff back then. It's nowadays the problem is you just quote the guy directly. I mean, it's hard to write. It's hard to still in business. It's hard to write parody of Donald Trump because the guy's a parody of himself, and especially now as his mental state starting to disintegrate, but it was never great to begin with. But we're watching this guy fall apart in real time, and it's some days picking on him. It feels like the moral low ground. So I kind of avoid it nowadays. Plus, I'm not, here in kind of humor we're all in, and I'm hoping we're having a great day, but might be like you said, I might be the canary in the coal mine because they're going to come for my ass first. So we'll just have to see how things go.
Jim,
Well,
that
go ahead,
7 years
Greg.
ago, I wrote a story. I told Manny Frischberg I could write a story about Trump that would make people cry. And I wrote a story about Trump in the nursing home with his daughter trying to take him to the dedication of the Trump Presidential Library, and he wants to play golf instead. And what's really sad is what I wrote in that story is exactly what we're seeing on stage now.
Yeah,
Same
that's the
kind of.
thing, and that's exactly right, Karen. It's that's kind of the boat we're in. For a long time, people, I don't know, basically referred to Trump's dementia or Trump's mental state or this or that or the other thing, and now you're seeing it. And as somebody who spent a not insignificant fraction of my life caring for somebody with advanced Alzheimer's and who ultimately died from it, I don't know that what he has is. I mean, I'm not a mental health expert. I'm not, and I'm certainly not a doctor. I'm not going to diagnose somebody online, but the degradation of his mental state, which was never, is pretty apparent. And I mean, the guy's never, some of it is obviously age related, and some of it is the fact that Trump has never really lived in reality to begin with. He's a rich, privileged white guy who could afford to live in his own fantasy land his entire life. I mean, you can't even imagine what his formative years were like. I mean, we know a little bit about his parents. We know that he was raised by servants. We know that he's a spoiled, rotten little privileged brat, and those kind of things. Those kind of things have a direct impact on how people ultimately become adults. And then throughout his entire adulthood, he's never faced the consequences for any of his actions, no matter what it was, whether it's sexual assault. And I'm irritated by the word sexual assault because what Trump did was rape, and that's who he is, and that's the whole mentality behind this guy, is that he can take whatever he wants, however he wants it, whenever he wants it, and literally nothing ever happens to him. He's a convicted felon, currently out on bail, awaiting sentencing, and 70 million people think that that's just great. And they're going to vote to ever have to face the consequences of his own actions. And I can't, for the life of me, understand the mentality. I can understand Trump's mentality because we see that everywhere we look. I mean, this has been true of America since its founding. Rich, privileged people that don't have to face the consequences of their own actions. So Trump's not unique in that particular aspect. What to me or boggles my mind is the fact that half of this country thinks that that's the kind of guy that should be leading the free world, and that's the part that I have a real problem with. My neighbors outside my window here who with their Trump bat signs, and I don't know. It's at this point, I feel like I'm repeating myself all the time. And we've been banging this drum for how long now? Ever since Trump rode down that escalator, and for some of us long before that.
Yeah. Well, Jim, the reason that I liked your essay, Antipodes, so much was because it really explored sociologically what parts of our society are supporting Trump. And in it, you pointed out that it was the poor have nothings and the very rich have everythings, and that the people in the middle didn't really want to mix it up with, they weren't excited about him, but that
Right.
I was fascinated that the rich people want him for the opposite reason than the poor people, but they're out there voting for him
Right.
and electing him, which is terrifying.
Yeah, and that's that's the crux of it. For those of us that are watching and don't know, we have a new book out, Southern Truths, right? So Southern Truths. that these two people here put together an amazing book, and there's a bunch of essays by a bunch of really great writers, and then it's a piece that some of you may have seen before. It's been updated a little bit and tweaked. It appeared in one or two other, or appeared in one other place, which I will leave nameless because I don't have a whole lot of kind things to say about those people. But I have nothing but kind things to say about Bob and BQ Press because they treat me very well. And but anyway, that story out here, this crappy little. There's not a lot of middle ground here. This is a very, very, very deep southern town, and you're either wealthy or you're on the bottom end of the scale, poverty. And there is some poverty here, the likes of which you can't imagine if you don't live in the deep south. And then there's wealth here that you can't imagine. And it's a very nice place to be. Yesterday or 2 days ago, I got in trouble. Not in trouble, but my shit on. Last time I went to vote, my voting station, my polling station, is in a Southern Evangelical Baptist church, and a huge monstrosity of a church, which just chaps my ass if you know me. But when I went there last time, there were poll workers that were wearing Trump merchandise, wearing Trump hats, and I found the poll judge. This is a violation of federal election law. It's a violation of state election law, and they just laughed at me. And I filed a complaint with the state election board, and it's the South. This is Ron DeSantis South, but this is the South. Nobody gives a shit what you think about. I mean, this is the South. They're going to do what the hell they want to, and they're going to stick it in your face. And the only goddamn way they're not going to do that is you roll in here with the National Guard under federal control and make them stop doing it. And this has been true all the way back to the Confederacy. And it's funny because people on Threads were, it was funny. Every other person on Threads was like, well, that's illegal. Well, yeah, no shit. That's the whole point of the post. Well, you should report that. Again, literally in the post. And, I said, well, but they can't do that. You don't understand the South.
Jim, there is an amazing story in the new book, in Southern Truths, by Larry Hodges, and it's called it's election day in Texas, and I'm a Democrat raring to vote. And it's about a guy trying to get, a black man trying to get to the polls to vote. And these amazing hurdles come up. And when he finally gets to the polls, and this sneering poll worker in Trump regalia, of course, is giving him grief, she tells him there's a poll tax. And he accepts that there's nothing he can do. That's what she's saying. And he says, I'll pay it. And she looks at him and says, you have to pay in Confederate dollars.
Right, right.
When I read that, I said, oh man, are we buying this story? Because you're right. They can be breaking the law left and right, and there is nothing the individual voter can do. You're just powerless when the community is run by his group. Right.
And this is true. This is a metaphor for America, for what I talked about earlier, where you literally have the world's richest man, an immigrant to America, literally, blatantly, openly breaking federal election law on national television. If you vote for my guy, I'll give you money. That's illegal. That's absolutely illegal. It's a felony. And government said, well, hey, Elon, and there's no charges. There's no, and the headlines from what is supposed to from the press, which is supposed to be the watchdog of liberty, but is really the lapdog of oligarchs nowadays, says, put these soft headlines in that say Elon Musk might be breaking election law. He's not. There's a much. And the answer is, even if we said, hey, that's illegal, the answer is, I'm the world's richest man. I own my own space fleet. I own all the communications in orbit. There's nothing you can do to me. Have a nice day. I'm just not going to follow the law. Piss off.
Jim, very ironically, one of my closest friends from college is on the Federal Elections Commission. She's
Right.
been on it for more than 20 years. And the problem with the commission is either the Congress has not filled the
Right.
position, or when they do, there's 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, and they get nothing done. And now they've apparently got 1 Democrat who's starting to vote with the Republicans, and
Right.
their votes are to never look into anything.
Right. Well, and this is true. I mean, and you've seen this. I mean, we know that Trump is guilty of sedition, of legion, of multiple crimes. We've known this for years. And I know I'm going to get there. People are going to start hollering at me, but literally we know this. And when Biden first took office and appointed Merrick Garland as Attorney General, and I said something about it, the answer was, whoa, hang on. You don't understand. You're not a lawyer. You don't understand how this works. We need to go slow. We need to cross the T's. We need to dot the I's. We need to take our time and make sure it right. I said, well, you're correct. I'm not a lawyer, but I do know a great deal about politics. And if you don't take action now, you will never take action, because that's how politics works. And here we are 4 years later, and now, even though this guy is daily committing election fraud, he is committing federal crimes in front of everybody, the answer is, well, we can't do anything now because it's election season. And you see, and that's the thing, you can never hold rich people accountable for anything because it's always the wrong time. It's like gun violence. It's never the right time to talk about it. Well, you dotted all the I's and you crossed all the goddamn T's, and it took too goddamn long, and here we are. And and so again, even and people say, well, the only reason Trump wants to get elected is so he doesn't go to prison. Trump's never going to prison. He's never going to prison. They're not going to hold him accountable. You can't hold rich people accountable in this country because the whole goddamn country will fall the hell apart. And and so I know it sounds incredibly cynical, and it is. It absolutely is, because again, if you don't arrest this goddamn guy, and I'll admit I'm wrong, but here we are. It's never the time. It's never time. Like, this guy committed rape, and then he bragged about it, and then he harassed the woman that he raped, and he was found accountable for that. And then he did it again, and then they charged him again, and now he's doing it again because nothing ever happens to this guy. He loses his money. So we were talking about this yesterday. To me, well, goddamn, Elon Musk, he lost all this money, bought Twitter, and he's losing all this money. You don't understand. First of all, it's not his money. Second of all, he doesn't give a shit. He's got all the money. He lost $40 billion. He's still the richest man in the world. He doesn't give a shit. It doesn't mean anything to him. What he wanted was to buy influence and power and be able to put his message into millions, billions of people's heads. And that's exactly what he got for his $40 billion. He doesn't give a shit when he loses the money. And Twitter goes out of, or X or whatever the hell we're calling it this week, goes out of business and the whole thing implodes. He got what he wanted. He got his money's worth. The money, that doesn't mean shit to him. It's like Bezos. Bezos doesn't even credit. We're all going to protest the Washington Post. You're not going to buy anything from Amazon. Okay, great, whatever. Because Bezos doesn't make any money. What he does is change. What he's obviously protecting is his government contracts. Because Amazon gets more money from that than they get from you. He doesn't give a shit whether he loses money or not, and he's not making any money. You're gonna cancel your subscription to the Washington Post. Big deal. He don't care. Why would he? Newspapers don't make money anyway. He didn't buy the Washington Post to get rich. He's already rich. Newspapers nowadays don't make these where the New York Times is the most powerful media empire in the world. Newspapers don't make money nowadays. Media news shows don't make money nowadays. Billionaires don't buy newspapers to make money. They buy newspapers to put their message into your head.
You know, Jim, that reminds me of this meme going around. The Daily Planet chose in an election race between Superman and Lex Luthor. The Daily Planet has chosen not to endorse a candidate.
Yeah, I saw that one. Yeah, yeah. And it's
Jim, talk to me a little bit about a theory that I've heard, that the reason that Bezos has promised to be hands off with the post, and of course now he's not. He's gotten right in the middle of it. And someone said that he is trying to placate Trump because tariffs, if Trump did put in tariffs against China, would really disrupt Amazon's business.
yeah, it's absolutely true. To a certain amount, to a certain extent, I think it's less about tariffs because here's the thing. First of all, Amazon or something similar to it, and there's not a hell of a lot similar to Amazon nowadays. We're addicted to it, and not addicted is the wrong word. Amazon took, and it's like Walt's the hell out of business. If you're not buying from Amazon, who are you buying from? I mean, we have a book, and I mentioned this to Bob before we went live, and that book is published on Amazon because that's the option. There isn't any other options. We don't have another option. If you want to buy the book from us, the audience that's watching us right now, you're going to buy it from Amazon because for people like us, that's the only avenue. That's how it is. So if you want to support us, you're going to have to support Jeff Bezos. That's how it works. And for a lot of people, and for a lot of people, left and right, there's a hell of a lot of outraged lefties today. Oh my God, I'm not going to buy any. Yeah, you know what? You are. You're going to order your toilet paper and your medicine and your whatever the hell it is from Amazon, and you are going to do it despite your outrage. And I mean, sure, there'll be a handful of you that don't, that cancel your Prime, but you're going to get your option because you can't afford anything else, or because it's too convenient, or because it comes to your front door, or because that's the only goddamn place you can get it from, because you can't buy it from the local mom and pop store because there isn't any.
Another factor, Jim, is Bezos and Amazon taking over the shipping industry. Because when my mother was ill and I was trying to order supplies for her, sometimes long distance, I was using Amazon because they could give me overnight delivery. And there were other places that I could order from, but it might turn up 2 weeks later, by which time my mother would have been dead or back in the hospital. So
right,
a lot
exactly.
of people have really, and if you're in a rural area, you are completely locked into Amazon, particularly if you're housebound. So yeah,
right. I mean, it's very convenient. It's very easy. It's the cheapest option a lot of times. For me, there are certain things that I can only buy through Amazon for some of the stuff that I do, for some of the photography business, or some of the things that I need to keep functioning. And it's simply how it is for people who travel, things like people buy their medication through Amazon, or if they don't, they're buying it through some other outfit that's owned by the same kind of people. They're buying it through Walgreens, or they're buying it through Walmart pharmacy, because if they travel or they move around, they have to be able to access medications or items or whatever that's available across at least the North American continent, if not overseas. And those are your options. Those are your options. That's how it is.
A lot of people. Someone posted the other day all of the companies independently branded that are Amazon, which is really shocking. Zappos, if you're a shoe freak like I love shoes, Zappos now belongs to Amazon. ABE Books, one of the most respected and long standing rare books and collectible book sites, owned by Amazon. You really have to make an effort to figure out what isn't Amazon these days.
Right. Yeah, and that's the problem. And and again, does that mean there's nothing you just roll over and accept it? Well, not necessarily, but also you have to put your fight where it makes a difference. And if you don't like this world, and you don't like the fact that you have to use these systems, and these systems are in place. Amazon's not going away. If you don't like the Washington Post, if everybody quit the Washington Post and tomorrow subscribe to the Des Moines Journal or whatever the hell, whatever, then the oligarchs would buy the goddamn Des Moines Journal. All right. And that's how this works. And all I can say to you, and people say to me, they look me in the eye and they say, well, government's not the solution, government's the problem. Well, then you've got the wrong kind of goddamn government, because the only thing that holds the wealthy and the oligarchs and outfits like Amazon and these media conglomerates accountable is the government. And the difference is that you're the stockholder in the government, as opposed to, I'll give you a perfect example. Threads is a really good example. That's the Meta platform that was supposed to be the replacement for Twitter when Musk bought that. And everybody's like, oh my God, so great. They got an editing function. It's going to be so much better. And then it turns out it's not. And the guy that runs it, Adam Mosseri, who works for Mark Zuckerberg, seems like a nice guy. He's on there all the time and doesn't listen to a goddamn thing you say. 20 million people complain to that guy every. He doesn't give a shit what you think. And the answer for it is because Meta doesn't give a damn about you. What they care about is their stockholders. Those are the people that they listen to. And this is true of Ford. It's true of Amazon. It's true of any business in the United States of America. If you're not one of those people, they don't give a shit what you have to say. You can take your business and go wherever the hell you want, and it means absolutely nothing to them. Where your voice matters is as a voter, as a citizen of the United States of America. And the only thing that can hold people like Adam Mosseri accountable is government regulation of a communications platform that has become integral to how we relate as a civilization and a society. Social media is going to have to be regulated exactly the same as a telephone company. That's how it has to be, because we can't live nowadays, because you can't go back, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. Too much of how we do business has moved onto those platforms, just like how a lot of how we do business has moved onto platforms like Amazon. And that means that the only way that you have any power over that is to elect people who will listen to you and do something about it. Half of that, there's people saying, yeah, we hear you. And then there's half of the people saying, well, yeah, that's all true, but I'm mad about this war that's happening somewhere over in the Middle East, so I'm not going to vote, or I'm going to throw my vote away on some bullshit. And then you got 70 million people who say, I really want the rich people to run everything. I think that's a great idea, so I'm going to vote for those people. Democracy's messy, and it's often difficult, and it's frustrating. And you were talking about cats. Well, it's a lot like trying to get a cat to do something.
Jim, talk to me a little bit about, I live out in Washington State. And
I'm on my way to you here in about a month. I'll be the guest of honor at SMOFCon in Seattle.
Oh, good. I'll see you. I'm going to be at SMOFCon.
Outstanding. I can't wait to see you.
This is wonderful. So what I wanted to tell you is out here, there's huge frustration. And the frustration is we're a blue state, and that's because we've got a giant blue city, three of them lined up in a row. And the problem is people are haranguing us. You need to go vote. You need to tell your neighbor to go vote. Well, my neighbor's going to go vote. My neighbor's out with signs all over the lawn. And we feel really frustrated. And we're being told to send postcards to people in red states, or to call people on the phone in red states. And my experience as someone who was an honorary citizen of Florida for 35 years when my parents lived there is those people do not want to hear from us. They think we're awful. I once had someone say to me, someone said to me, I can tell you're one of those liberals. And I said, what? My purple hair gave me away? But what is it that people, because of the Electoral College, people in Washington get, we vote and then we sit home and twiddle our thumbs. What should we be doing?
And that is not great. And it's also great. And it's also human nature. First of all, to answer your question, I live on the opposite end. I live in a crappy little deep South Florida Panhandle town, which might as well be Central Alabama. And not everything. Don't get me wrong. Everybody mad. I'll get hate mail. Not everything about. I live here. There are some good things about the South. I'm a big fan of cheese grits, but you know as well as I do, if you live here in the South, there's very much this entrenched mindset, and it dates back to the founding of the country and back to when you could own people, and it's part of the culture and it's part of the place, and there's kind of this thin veneer of Southern politeness over the top of it, and so it's the opposite here. Letters to liberals. And again, I mean, I'm surrounded by these people. I talk to these people. I stand here and I have folks in my town tell me, well, you know what it's like, man. Those transgenders, they're my God, they're people send their kids to school and then they come home with different gender, and it's these transgenders are sticking it to everybody, and they're molesting children. I'm like, hang on just a second before we go any further on this. In the last year in this town, there have been 3 prominent arrests for child molestation, pedophilia, and child porn. And every one of those people were Baptist ministers from 3 different churches. One guy was using the church computer and the church credit card to buy this stuff, and that's how the FBI found him. And the next day, there's a big, after they literally arrested him, went into the church, arrested this guy, dragged him away. And the next day, the sign out front is condemning trans people and liberals for child molestation. And I'm like, and again, it's a mindset that that people deliberately blind themselves to the things that they see around them. That, like you said, you write letters to people, and then well, I don't even care if it just makes me madder, and just makes me just want to vote for that guy even more. That's human nature. It's incredibly frustrating. It leads to things like war. It leads to things like what's happening in the Middle East right now, where people who have fought for hundreds of years or thousands of years, depending on what your viewpoint is and where you draw the line, start history, where people, the Americans don't understand about the Middle East, and particularly about the conflict that's currently happening in Israel and Gaza, is that these people don't want peace. I've been there many times. The Palestinians don't want peace. The Israelis don't want peace. They want the other side eradicated. That's why they see peace. And no, I'm not saying everybody. It's a general statement, but all Americans in the world are like, we show up every couple of years with every new administration, and we say, hey, look, here's our peace plan, and everybody shakes hands because they all need the money and the weapons and the support, and they all look like they're touching human shit with their bare hands. And then as soon as the Americans leave, they go back to killing each other. But I will say to you that this isn't the first place that kind of thing has happened. When I was growing up, the Catholics and the Protestants in Ireland spent a hell of a lot of time doing exactly the same thing, killing each other, killing our children. And yet today, you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody from this generation who even remembers that conflict. Eventually, a new generation reached a point where they decided they weren't going to kill each other. And as much as it pained them, they were going to make peace with each other, and they were going to raise their children without that. And nowadays, I'm not going to say it's all happiness and sweetness and light, and people certainly do remember those conflicts, the older generation especially, but it's possible to change that kind of institutionalized hate and mindset. And we see that very much here in the United States, where we're not quite where the Israelis and the Palestinians are, but we're not all that goddamn far from it either, where people seem to feel that war and killing and murder and bloodshed are inevitable, and that they're raising their children to be the next generation of soldiers in this goddamn stupid ass war. We don't have to. It is always possible to change fate. This isn't the Terminator movie. Skynet is not inevitable. there is no fate which we make for ourselves, and it is possible to change direction. And so the long way around, back to the question that you asked, is that if you only change the minds of a fraction, of a handful of people, well, that might produce an electoral vote. And that might change the course of history. That single flap of that single butterfly's wing may change our future. I will say to you that if you don't do it, things will never change. It's like the
Jim,
lottery. I mean, we all know, yeah, I mean, we all know the lottery's rigged. We all know the odds are against us. We all know that the goddamn ticket is 13 million to one that you'll strike it rich. But the thing is, if play, you can't win.
Jim,
And
listening to your talk about Ireland gives
yeah,
me actually hope for the United States. It does
yeah,
not give me a lot of hope for the Middle East. And I'll tell you why. I
right.
think a real key to why Ireland was able to achieve détente, essentially, was because people are adequately well off there. It is not a country of extreme poverty. And I think the
Yeah.
fact that people had some economic stability, the Irish economy has done well under tech. There have been young
Oh,
people
sure,
have
absolutely.
jobs. And I think that the United States can get things resolved along that model. But I really despair of the Middle East.
We're sitting here on a podcast, and I don't want to oversimplify things. I spent most of my life in crappy places where people, and don't get me wrong, Ireland's a great place, not a crappy place at all. And there's a lot of places in Israel and Palestine. I spent a lot of time in Israel and Palestine and places like that. And there's a lot of great places there and a lot of wonderful people too. Don't get me wrong. I spent a lot of time in places like Central Africa, where people have spent many, many years trying to kill each other. And as horrible as some of those places are, there's also wonderful people. And you're absolutely correct. These things are, I'm simply using them as examples. Nothing is ever that simple, and nothing is ever that easy. And conflict doesn't go away one day. I mean, even in Ireland today, you'll find people that will get into a pitched battle in a pub over whether you're drinking Jameson's or Bushmills, and so and I've gotten myself into trouble by mentioning the wrong whiskey online. And one thing Irish about, but um, again, nothing's ever that easy, and especially when it comes to conflicts that are institutional, that are historic, that have generation upon generation of history and people's passion and hate and love and all of those kind of things. People are incredibly complicated. And the more people you get, the more complicated it gets. The complication of humanity is geometric, it's logarithmic. And so two people are 8 times more complicated than one person all by themselves. And so these conflicts, but what they require, the one thing that's universal to resolving all of these things or perpetuating them, is electing leaders who are willing to set the example, who are willing to sacrifice, who are willing to see beyond the conflict and beyond what's in it for them. And I think that's why this election is so important, because you have on one side a person who's not perfect. I mean, she has got issues that liberals don't like, but she's got things that are great. She's incredibly experienced and talented. Some people don't want to vote for her because they don't like her voice. I mean, I heard that bullshit about Hillary Clinton, for crying out loud. Some people don't want to vote for her because they don't like how she dresses or some nonsense. All of those things, those things require you as to be an adult, to be a human being, to override your visceral reaction and look beyond that at someone who has vision, who is willing to build bridges, as compared to somebody who lights the goddamn bridges on fire and throws gasoline on the conflict. And that's literally where we're at here. I mean, your choices are continuing into chaos or electing someone who wants to build a better world for all of us. They're never going to have all they're never going to be the person that you want them to be. That's how it is. Except in Donald Trump's case, he kind of is the person they want him to be because that's what they want. I'm surrounded by people who love the idea of to everybody else. And so the more horrible he is, the more they like him. The problem with the other side is that they want everybody to be perfect. They want their candidate to be perfect. They want what's going on back there, Bob? You got ghosts or something? And, they want their candidate to be perfect. Everything has to line up, or they, and then they're mad. And it was just like this with Obama, who say so far has been the best president of mine, born when Kennedy was president. So I'm well aware of where we're at here, but Obama was incredibly intelligent and he's smart and he was funny and he was handsome and he was well read and well educated and he was all of those things that you want in a leader. And in the second year of his presidency, the left screwed him because he didn't give everybody the pony that they wanted. They stood by or they stayed or they protest voted, and we wound up with the fucking Tea Party. And I'm not going to apologize for my language because that's the proper pronunciation of those sons of bitches. And now, all these years later, those people with their little tea bags and their hate and their ridiculous, uneducated, ignorant Sarah Palin, well, that's where the MAGA movement came from. And that's exactly what we're looking at here. And so, again, I spent a lot of time back in those days writing long essays and talking to people and trying to build bridges. And there comes a point where you realize that you don't have any equal ground with those people. You can't bridges with people who's human and who want you dead. Now, fortunately, that might be the hardcore of that outfit. But there are enough folks on the other side or on that side or on whatever the hell side it is that are willing to step back from the brink that maybe today, just in the last few weeks, are starting to see that maybe that's not the world they want. And so, again, to go back to the question that you asked, what do we do? We're writing letters and people are yelling at us. Yeah, it's true. But you know how mass marketing works, right? I mean, you know why you get spam phone calls? Because
it works.
You can make 10,000 cold calls and people like me scream. And then there's that one person who decides to buy the product and it's profitable. So of all of those letters that you write and all of those phone calls that you make and all of that hate thrown back in your face as a result, if you could change the mind of one person, that one butterfly wing flap may be what changes the course of history. And so, yeah, it's shoveling shit against the tide, but sometimes that's what it takes to stop the flood. And so here we are. I know it's not a great answer.
No,
I know
it's an interesting answer. And I want to tap into your expertise in an area that has really got me worried. My current prediction is I think that Harris is going to have one of the most sweeping popular vote victories that we have seen in several election cycles. I think it's going to be amazing. But I'm very, very concerned about the Electoral College. And I've been reading up on the phenomenon of faithless Electoral College voters who the law says they have to vote one way and they vote another way. And the way that the Republican Party has done a tremendous amount of work over the years to really get control at the local and state levels of their activists and their party people. What is your take on the Electoral College right now? Do you think it will perform even as it's supposed to, as frustrating as that might be?
You know, that's an incredibly difficult to call. I think Harris is going to take the popular vote, just as Biden did. I think the danger, exactly as you said, is the electoral vote. Now, people who've listened to me for a long time, first of all, I don't know what the hell's the matter with you, but second of all, have heard me say many, many times that one of the incredibly frustrating things about this country is that Americans show up every 4 years for the one vote where their, I mean, it matters, but their vote doesn't decide the outcome, right? And then they ignore all those elections in between where the vote actually decides the outcome. And the ironic part of that is that those elections, those local elections for mayor and dog catcher and county clerk and those kind of things, well, those are the people who send the electors to their state's electoral college.
Now,
and so you show up, and you show up every 4 years, and you're passionate about it, and the election comes out overwhelmingly for your candidate, but because you didn't show up in the intervening years, the electors that go to your state electoral, or that represent your state in the electoral college, may decide to nullify your vote, despite what the law says or what their state law says. And it's a patchwork because not every state works that way. And this is one of the things about our elections, is that states get to decide how they run their own elections. And so within federal framework, but the bottom line here is, yeah, it's a real danger. It's a real danger that the electoral college, whether that's fair, whether it's correct, whether it's legal, history is written by those people who win, and whether they win legally or whether they don't, well, you can argue it. Then you rewrite history to make sure that you're the good guys, and we've done that many times. And but the short answer is, let's say you win, okay? And every better, a little worse, and now we're at a deflection point in history. Okay, so let's say that it works the way it's supposed to, or it works well enough that Harris becomes our next president, and hopefully when I say you, America, you will have given her the tools that she needs to do her job, which is a Democratic majority House and a Democratic majority. If you don't do that part, then you might as well not bother to vote for Harris, because our government is multiple pieces. It's a complicated machine. Doesn't work very well, but then no government actually does. And so if you don't give her the tools and the support that she needs to do her job, then you don't have any right to be disappointed later on when she doesn't produce the results that you think you want. That said, that if we make Kamala Harris president, and we give her a majority House and a majority Senate, then it is upon her to make those changes. And this is something that Democrats are always reluctant to do, because they want to make friends, and they want to build bridges. They don't, and this is always a problem with liberals, because liberals want to be liked. And again, it's not a criticism; it's just a statement of how the world works. And we, all three of us, the people you're looking at on the screen, we write science fiction, and one of the things that I'm kind of doing the Donald Trump weave here, I think. But one of the things about sci-fi is there's basically two types of fans, and there are those fans that grew up reading traditional science fiction and look out at the universe and see those aliens, and they want to get in their warships and go out and fight a win. A certain genre that is humans fighting aliens, and it's lasers and guys in power armor, and the TV version of Starship Troopers. And then there's the other half of science fiction fandom, which look out at the universe, the Star Trek people that look out at the universe and say it's vast and weird and alien. Let's go meet those people and see if they want to be friends. And so science fiction has always been kind of a microcosm of the world. And that's very true here. And so we have people who look at that look at this sort of thing and want to crush everybody, be underneath their boots, and make everybody the same. And we've got a candidate like that. And then we have the liberals who want everybody to be their buddies. And so part of the problem with, even if you elect Kamala Harris, who she's really not a liberal. She only looks like she's a liberal because everybody else is so far to the right. They've become Attila the Hun. And that's kind of me. People look at me and say, oh, you're a liberal. I'm not a liberal. It just looks that way. I don't care if you think I am, and I'm not insulted to be called it, but it's the same thing with Harris. And so what has to happen this time, again, come a long way around to the answer, is that if you put sane people in charge and you give them the power to affect change, then they need to affect that change, and they need to do it while they have the power, because they won't have the power forever. This was the problem with the Obama presidency. And don't get me wrong, I admire Barack Obama enormously. But the fundamental failure of his administration was he thought people were reasonable and he wanted to build bridges. And he only had the authority to really affect change in the first 2 years of his 8 years of administration before liberals yanked the rug out from underneath and saddled his ass with the Tea Party. And after that, effective, dramatic, deliberate change became impossible. And this is what we face now. If Kamala Harris is our next president and you give her the tools to do the job, then she must have the courage to affect that change. And one of the things that has to change about this country is the goddamn Electoral College. Primarily slavery got a fair shake in this country. Okay, whatever. And this is an institution that is long outdated, that nobody really likes, but nobody really has the courage to do anything about. This is like the similar in ideology to things like the filibuster in the Senate. There are reasons for having a filibuster so that the minority voice is not just automatically crushed by the majority. Now is primarily to prevent any sort of progress whatsoever. People do
Jim,
secret holds.
You're talking about the importance of having a Democratic president who's not afraid to kick ass. And we haven't had a lot.
And I think right. And I don't think Obama was afraid to kick ass. I think that, again, we live in a very different world than when Barack Obama took office, because back then, as far right as the Republican Party was, they were still fairly reasonable people. Now, I know I'm going to get hate mail for that, but if you compare George W. Bush, who I despise probably more than you can imagine because he sent my ass to Iraq, but if you compare George W. Bush to someone like Donald Trump, and your choices were one of those two guys to lead your country, who'd you vote for? I know I'd have no problem rolling my ass down there and casting my for Bush, as much as I don't like the guy, because as much as I despise his administration, it still is fairly reasonable and rational. And you have no idea how much it pains me to say that compared to where we are today. So it's a very, very different world. Don't hate mail, for God's sake. I served in the military under that asshole, and Paul Wolfowitz and Donald Rumsfeld and Dick fucking Cheney. So I don't need you to remind me of what that time was like. Okay, I know, but my point is that, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I agree. Everything I've read says that, but I want to make one little point. When the House was voting articles of impeachment for Trump, remember, 10 Republicans voted to advance those to the Senate.
Right.
Of those 10 Republicans, 9 have been taken down. There is a 10th. His name is Dan Newhouse.
Right.
Now, Dan and I have disagreed on many subjects, but he's a farmer and he's an honest man, and he's the last probably the last honest Republican in Washington State standing. Um, and since we have a top two primary system, he is advanced with the right wing, ultra right wing, Trump endorsed Republican. And I'm just going to throw in the notion that says, guys, just like Jim would hold his nose and vote for George W. Bush today if he was running for president against Trump, I'm holding my nose and I'm voting for Dan Newhouse because he's got a Trumper, MAGA Mo, running against him. And so back to the concept of getting reasonable people in Congress so Kamala Harris has a chance to do the right thing when she gets elected. You got to hold your nose sometimes and do it. There ain't nobody getting a pony. There ain't no unicorns on the ballot. There's the best you can get sometimes, and vote them.
Bob, I want to jump in and say, I think one of the greatest tragedies in politics in the past 20 years has been essentially the squashing of a generation of middle-aged, moderate Republicans who got run out of state office by their own party so that uneducated, unskilled, unconnected people like Lauren Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene could get into office. And these people who were truly public servants and were conservative Republicans, they've left. They're not in politics anymore. Washington lost one of the best Republican politicians they've ever had, Rob Morrison, who was a brilliant attorney general and should have, been the governor. These people just got run out of town. And I think that is a terrible tragedy for people who are conservative. They don't have people that you'd want to vote for anymore.
Yeah, and that's absolutely true. It's the fact that, Lauren Boebert, my God, all I can say is that the one good thing about Lauren Boebert is that, my God, she's got to be a hell of a relief to someone like Louis Gohmert, who's no longer the dumbest guy in Congress. But, again, it's not people vote for them that again, and somebody mentioned, and I am watching your comments as they scroll by, and we're running out of time here, and where I'm paying attention. Then there's only so much you can talk about. I had to laugh. I had to laugh at Liam Westcott's comment about if Richard Nixon were to come back, he'd be drummed out of the GOP as being too liberal. Hell, Ronald Reagan would be drummed out of GOP, and but again, hell, Bush probably would be. But again, these are the times that we live in. And I think the fundamental difference, and I think somebody noted it in the comments here, I don't think it's original to me. I think that's actually me looking at it and processing that through, is that whether or not you agreed with people like Ronald Reagan, or whether you agreed with people like George H.W. or even W. Bush, George the Lesser there, whether or not you agreed, or even Nixon, they were who believed in America. They were people who believed, as Reagan said, in the shining city on the hill. They believed in building a world that worked, a nation that worked for us. Now, we disagree on how to go about that. I have fundamental disagreements with Reagan's idea of economics, and what's really become entrenched in the Republican ideology nowadays of just the ultimate trickle down economic, that nonsense. But at least they believed in building. And the Republican Party of today does not believe in building. They're arsonists. They want to burn everything to the goddamn ground. They're not conservatives in the traditional sense, though that's what the word is morphed into, whether conservatives like that idea or not. That's literally what conservatism is now, that arson setting fire to everything. But again, you have people that are, especially like here where I live, and I've said this online, I've said it on this podcast a couple times before, and I've written about it, is that when I talk to people and I say, listen, man, you talk about, I live in Matt Gaetz district, for those who don't know, and there's big signs out here that says, keep Gaetz fighting. Fighting for what? He's passed no legislation. The only place that you're safe from Matt Gaetz is in his district, because he's never here. And if he does show up once in a while, he's out in Navarre with his rich buddies. I mean, it's not like you have to worry about this. I mean, this is the one place you're probably safe from being sexually assaulted by Matt Gaetz. What's Matt Gaetz done for you? He's against every bit of legislation that's brought money to this impoverished district. When you say fighting, what's he done for you? And I've had people look me right in the eye and say, I don't care as long as he makes you mad. And that's really the mindset of 70 million Americans. Of we don't care if we burn the country down and we end up squatting in the dark and shitting on our shoes, as long as we get to stick it to you in the process. That's the part that has to change. We're never all going to agree on how the country ought to be run, or how to solve inflation, or how to solve economics, or how to solve poverty, or any of this. We're never going to agree on all that, because that's how democracy works. Is people are messy, and that's fine. And that's how America worked for a long, long time, and made a lot of really decent progressive changes despite all of those conflicts. The difference is that nowadays you have a very significant of the country of people that are just mean, vicious sons of bitches who don't care whether they cut off their own nose, so long as they can spite your face, man. As long as they can stick it to you. And it's very much that. I don't blame TV for it. TV is a symptom of the larger thing. But you look at things like reality TV, popular shows are where you have people screaming at each other, yelling and throwing shit. I mean, that meme with the woman, with the tears and the snot running down her face, and then the smug cat looking back at him. Everybody wants to be that cat.
Jim,
and that's the
I think that
problem with America today.
The problem is that they're tapping into something that, if you read American literature back to Nathaniel Hawthorne and forward to Mark Twain and stuff, they're tapping into something that America has always had. And I think England has a bit of it too. And it's the annoyance at people who are perceived as getting above their raising.
Right.
There's something in America.
That's very much a Southern thing. Whew.
And it's a New England thing too. It's not the way we do it around here. And when people start getting things that other people don't have, people get jealous. It's jealous. It's envy. It's wanting to not see other people do well. And it's the sad side of the American dream. And unfortunately, that's the side we're seeing a lot of right now.
I mean, you very much see that here, where you see generational poverty, where and it's not because there's not systems in place to lift people out of that poverty, and not great systems, but there are ways out. My wife's a good example. She didn't have much growing up, and she has an MBA nowadays, and and she had the luxury of giving all that up to keep an eye on her grandson, our 2-year-old grandson, who's in the house right now, and it's just a joy of our lives. And but you have many people here who don't want their children to do any better, and in fact get very angry about it. And it's very much a thing here in the town that I live in, and the larger southern area that I live in, is that you don't want your children, you don't want them to have better health care than you had. You don't want them to have better dental. You don't want them to have a better education. Don't get above your station.
Jim,
they don't want their children to be doctors or lawyers or engineers or educated. And I will tell you, the loudest voice in that particular mindset is the church. Don't get above your station. Don't. Now, meanwhile, the preacher man's raking in the money, and so you can kind of see the motivation for it. But again, and I don't blame religion for it, but it's definitely a symptom. It's definitely part of that power structure, that entrenched power structure of that power structure is built on the backs of people that are ignorant and poor.
Jim,
And
I grew up somewhere
yeah,
in a middle class environment where education was the solution. And in the summers, I lived in a working class environment. And I remember people's parents making fun of me because I read books.
oh
The
yeah,
parents
oh yeah,
made fun of me for reading. And where I lived in the winter, the parents were always praising us and taking us to the library and sending us to special tutoring programs. And in in the working class neighborhood, it was a lot of, you don't need that. You're just going to take over your father's grocery store.
you're going to work the same machine. I know people where I grew up in the Midwest. And in fact, it's funny you should mention this. You said you're going to be at SMOFCon. This is one of those
Yes.
elections. This is one of the talks that I'm going to give at SMOFCon. I grew up in the Midwest, and where I grew up, you either milk cows or you made cars. That's how it worked. This is back in the 60s and the 70s, and that's 1960s and 70s for you little punks that were born in this century. But you milked cows or you made cars. And what I mean by that is I knew a hell when the last year I was in high school, I got a temporary job working for American Seating, which I don't even know if they exist anymore, but they were a large factory that made the seats for cars for General Motors. Specifically, I worked on a line that made the seats for school buses. And there were people that had worked there for 4 generations. The factory itself was 1903, something like that, and it was very much like a big, huge. It had been fired by coal. It still had the shafts, the drive shafts in the overhead. That there was a big central steam engine that turned those shafts that ran the machines, and those shafts were still there. Pulleys were long gone, and the machines, though, they were the same machines that had been powered by steam 50 years before, but today had electric motors on the bottom. But they were the same machine. They were built by Oliver in like 1917 or 1920, things like that. And there were people that were proud of the fact that they pulled the same handle that their dad pulled, that their grandfather pulled, that their great father pulled. And they had no ambition beyond that. And if you were in the break room with some of these people, they were proud of the fact that they dropped out of high school at 16 and they never had any ambition beyond that. And then that's right about the time that we started sending those jobs overseas and to Mexico and to places like that. And suddenly those people had nowhere to go because nobody was hiring a guy whose only skill was pulling the same handle as dad pulled. And they were not mad at the industry or the culture had no ambition. They were mad at the government because they had no opportunity. And I don't know what happened to those people. I joined the military and got the hell out of there. And but I know people that grew up in the same farming. They were, like I said, that milk cows that did those things. And this is some of the stuff I'll talk about at SMOFCon. It's by way of getting to the things that they asked me to come there and talk about. But again, all of these things. Society. That's the alarm telling us that we're way over time now. The all these things. Society's complicated. America's complicated. There's this enormous inertia to society that when the tide starts to blow in one direction, it becomes increasingly difficult to stop, and that's why you want things like two, where you could see for 10 years that it was coming, but it just kept coming. It just kept coming. It just kept coming like an avalanche coming down the side of the mountain. And there were 1,000 deflection points in that unrushing tide where we could have changed things, where we could have diverted aside fascism. We could have saved 6 million Jewish lives, 12 million people, 250 million people that were affected by that horrible war and conflict. We could have changed this stuff, and we just didn't. And you see it now here in America, where again you see like this unrushing tide, this inertia of ideology where uh, where people don't even know what the hell they believe in. They just believe. And again, I don't know how many we've all seen these interviews with Trump supporters where they say, make America great again. Okay, great when? Great how? I saw this earlier today. Someone said, if you don't think America was ever great, you didn't live through the 1950s. And they showed two white young people drinking a milkshake. And I said, yeah, that's it, again. That's very much a MAGA mindset because that ignores McCarthyism, massive segregation, discrimination, lynching, sundown towns, forced Indian boarding schools, warehouses of iron lungs, lack of vaccine, no hormonal birth control, women didn't have rights. Jesus, massive runaway inflation, child labor. Sure, if you were 18 years old and you were going to the fish under the sea dance like you're Marty McFly in Back to the Future, yeah, the 50s were fucking great. But it ignores all the other people and all of the other things that happened in that era. And it highlights the danger of ideology driven by nostalgia for things that never really were. And that's kind of where we're at here. You have an entire movement built on this fantasy for never really great again. What do you mean by that? Like, was it great when we could own people? Was it great when millions of us had to go to war to defend Europe from fascism and the Pacific from Japanese invasion? I mean, when was America great? What are you talking about? How about a movement that says our greatness is ahead of us and we should all be working in that direction? I mean, when was America? It was, when did we feed every child in this country? When did every person in this country have a warm, safe place to sleep? When were women in this country safe from sexual assault and earning 80% of what men earn for the same goddamn job? I mean, you want to talk about make America great again? Tell me about that time. When did that happen? Because it didn't exist. Isn't that the world that we should be building? And again, we had this conversation online. If you follow me online, we had this conversation here a couple of days ago where where there were people in my timeline that were honestly mad about feeding children, about school lunches. By God, fuck those kids. If your parents can't afford to feed you, they shouldn't have had you in the first damn place. Well, that's a hell of a mindset for people that want to get rid of birth control and abortion. But but and it's also a hell of a mindset for people who cannot visualize themselves ever falling upon and and or their circumstances ever changing from being white and privileged and having plenty to eat. And
Jim,
so my question was
I
is
want to jump in and point
oh,
out
go ahead.
that Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty was what exposed the poverty of the 1950s. We went to send people to Vietnam, and we discovered that a lot of the men we were drafting were so poorly educated and were so physically debilitated that we realized that the United States was not raising a healthy generation of young people. That led to Head Start, school lunches, all sorts of stuff. Because
Sure.
it was weird that we went to go to war and we didn't have people fit enough to do it. And I think we're ready for another war on sort of moral and intellectual poverty in this country,
Right.
because our educational system is shot to shit. We don't respect teachers. I mean, when we say kids don't respect teachers, it's because their parents don't respect the teachers enough to actually pay them a decent salary. It's a complete tragedy.
Well, again,
Well,
you're mentioning this again. You talk about we discovered this about our country at the beginning of Vietnam. We also discovered the same thing at the beginning of World War II. When people don't realize it, they all think that the Greatest Generation went off in like a Kenny Rogers song. It wasn't like that. There was a draft. There were a lot of people that were draftees. But one of the things that we discovered is, and in fact, the phrase is, of course, at the end of the war, is how are you going to keep them down on the farm now that they've seen Paris? And But it wasn't just Paris. It was the education the army gave them, the worldly experience of working with other people, of of seeing other worlds, of fighting this conflict, of the horrible hypocrisy of the United States. Yet a significant fraction of our troops were people of color who had even less rights in our own country, and we're recognized for 50 years after that conflict for the heroism and the staggering sacrifice that those people gave. I mean, shit. 99% of this country never heard of the Code Talkers until Nicolas Cage came along. For Christ's sake, and again, and that check around the circle that you talked about, the teachers, because one of the terrible things that came out of that, as far as the people who run and own this country, is that spelled the death of the American version of feudalism. Because prior to World War II, you either owned companies and lived in the big mansion on top of the hill, or you paid them for the privilege of eating out of their garbage can. There was a hell of a lot of people in this country that look back on that as some kind of golden age and forget that they were living in coal mining towns in West Virginia, or they were building railroad cars for Pullman in his company town, and being paid in his script, and worshiping in his church, and buying shit in his grocery store and seeing his doctor. Or the same thing with Henry Ford, who he talked about he wanted to pay his workers a good wage so they could buy his car. Well, that's true up to a certain point, but I mean, that's a guy that went around the world building. He built Fordlandia in South America, where everybody had to do what he said and worship in his church. And again, after World War II, because of the change, because of this forced education on an entire generation, people came home from Europe and they were different. They didn't want to live in somebody else's house, and they didn't want to work on a farm behind a horse, and so you had the birth of the entire middle class, which really didn't exist before the Second World War, and the creation of suburbia for the right people. Of course, if you were black and you wanted to buy a house in the new suburbs, well, there wasn't anything for you. And so now we talk about, now you have people like Donald Trump who talk about the inner cities without any awareness that it was people just like him and his father who created those inner cities by offering cheap, easy loans to white people to move out to the goddamn suburbs, the newly built suburbs, and leave all of the people that they didn't like behind. And so, and then of course they moved all the factories and stuff out there too, and then there was nothing. And then, I mean, you often hear Trump talk about places like Flint, Michigan, or Detroit, and how terrible it is, and yet he's exactly the industrial, or the kind of, he's not an industrialist, but he's exactly the kind of rich people who move the entire industry, that those entire areas that Flint and Detroit depended on, overseas in search of profit and shareholder value, and had no plan for the people that they left behind. What were they supposed to do? 5 million people suddenly didn't have jobs when the factory down. How are they supposed to go? These are the same people that were told generation after generation, you don't need an education. You just need to pull the handle on the same machine your daddy did. And then they shut it down and they shipped all those machines to China so Chinese people could make the goddamn parts for pennies on the damn dollar. And they abandoned these people. And now they act like these people created their poverty themselves, and that and that the wealthy bear no responsibility for this. And it's an American story, because we've done this over and over again. And so those are the things that have to change. And you look at what choices are in this election here in 2 weeks, and you have, again, you have one person who's not perfect, but at least has a vision for how we might establish the road for changing that. And it's not going to happen overnight. You can't goes away and everybody gets better. It's going to take time. It took 60 years to dig ourselves in this hole. It's probably going to take that long to dig our way out, especially when you have people that are actively fighting to make it worse. And that's your other choice, the people who want to make it worse. Those are your options. Those are your choices. And if you're going to stay home because you're mad about what's happening in Gaza, then you're a goddamn fool. We're all mad about it. Home ain't going to make it any better for anybody. And if you want someone who listens to your concerns, well, you got one guy who adamantly doesn't listen to anybody, not even himself, and you got one person that you have pretty decent options of listening to you and listening to your concerns. But there's also the reality of politics, of human. You're not going to get everything that you. That's reality. You have to be an adult and face that. And I think we are a good half an hour past the kill zone here, Bob. What are you going to do about it?
I'm just amazed at how many hot topics we didn't get to. This is
right.
This
Well,
is,
one thing that we need to get to is one thing that we need to do before you pull the plug on us, Bob, is you need to plug the shit out of that damn book and where people can get it.
Okay, well, I will plug the shit out of that damn book in just a second. I respect all you people that says, well, what's Bob got to say? Well, Bob's got to say a lot, but Bob's got the joy of knowing there are people that are more articulate than him, smarter than him, that are on this show today saying almost everything I would say.
What the hell are those people?
Oh, I don't know, Jim, but I got them in the background somewhere. The joy of it is this, and I will tell you the only thing I wanted to say that I didn't say is that the Supreme Court's going to decide this election. And it's going to decide this election when two factors come into play. When Kamala Harris wins Arizona and North Carolina, and the ultra-conservative legislatures in those states try to reverse the law to allow the legislature to redirect the Electoral College to accept a new set of delegates established by the legislature, and that is against the law. They've already got the law saying how they're going to do it. But when you break the law and you're rich, I think somebody pointed out you can get away with it. When you break the law and you're rich and powerful and you own that pathetic excuse for Supreme Court we have right now, don't expect them to uphold the rule of law if it costs Trump the election. Just pray that we get that big enough plurality that they're maybe afraid to. Because remember one thing, as we go into this, if that happens, there's going to be pro-democracy protests all over this country. 30 years ago, Trump, when addressing the pro-democracy protests in Tiananmen Square, voiced his admiration for the Chinese government as they shot down those protesters and said, remember, this is what strength can do. Trump is all about power. Don't think that we can save our country after the election. We got to save it before the election. You got to save it by voting big, voting like your democracy depended on it, because we're going to get the government that we vote for, I hope. So anyway, I just wanted to get that off my chest. Now, you said something about this book. We got this book called Southern Truths out. You guys may have noticed that an Alan Yen Shapiro has commented 31 times during this podcast. Okay. Well, there's a reason. He wrote 2 stories that are currently in our new book that we're talking about. That is Southern Truths. You can get it by searching for it. It's not that hard to find, because you search Amazon, you'll find it. And in it, the one story I have to remind you of, because I pay homage to David Gerrold, who is not here today because he's on the road. But in his early days, when he was 8 years old, he wrote a story called The Trouble with Tribbles, hitchhiked to California on the back of a fruit wagon, and sold this story to Gene Roddenberry called The Trouble with Tribbles. Okay? Now, he has guarded that story, he has promoted that story, and he has rightfully earned a place in our hearts for that story, that script, that history. But what he has now done is he has written The Trouble with Dribbles. And he has put The Trouble with Dribbles into this book. And I have to give homage to Karen, who's up there on that screen. Karen is my go-to editor, and she worked with David and Jim both on their stories and turned their incredible stories into incredible stories. She managed to do all the editing without making them less incredible. So she deserves a lot of credit for this book. Jim deserves credit for it with Antipodes. I mean, I've never seen a bike ride through the South make me think as much as your story did. And there are so many other stories. We talk about Alan Jen Shapiro's story, In the Darkness, Defending the Wall, you know, about immigration. Or The Healthcare Bitch is Here for the People, you know. That is what happens when a superhero with some degree of scruples goes to work as a spokesman for a healthcare company. You know, hey, she does what she does, and she does it well.
There's also an amazing story by Adam Troy Castro.
That's right.
Where he looks at what's going to happen in the future, in a dystopian future, what Florida is going to be like, and how the theme park culture is going to play into a dystopian future, and it is chilling and beautiful.
Yeah, that's a pretty good description of Adam. Chilling and beautiful. And to answer your question, John Bude, am I pronouncing that right? He wrote about a prostate story. Yes, he did. And yeah, you have to buy the story. You have to buy the book and find out. But yeah, that story is pure David Gerrold. I swear to God.
It is brilliant beyond words. I mean,
those words. I'm just not going to use them here. Yeah.
Well, the difference between a short story and a novel is like the difference between a date and a marriage. You know, David Gerrold, that story he wrote could be a novel, and he could turn it into.
Yeah, he's just the guy to write it too. So.
Oh my God!
We gotta get rolling here, buddy. It's 12:30. So I've for those that are watching, I've shared the BQ Press link for Southern Truths on my Facebook page, and be up on my Threads page here shortly. And see you there. Buy the book. That'd be great.
Yeah. And now, now, only the Kindle is out. I just keep checking, but the print copy is in still in review. And we are, by the way, the #1 new release in absurdist fiction. And absurdist fiction is a new category that if you think you might not like it, Catch 22 is currently selling well in absurdist fiction. It is that kind of category. It's that kind of book. They finally got a category that's made for us, made for Jim, made for David, Karen, myself, and Karen's even got a secret story in it.
I do. I wrote under a pen name, and I did a story about a small southern town that has one eccentric couple, very elegant, who are Democrats, and they're considered to be so eccentric that when they put a Biden sign out on their lawn, a neighbor thought they had dementia.
Hey, when I put
That sounds like you're writing. Sounds like you're writing an autobiography, biography for me out here.
Yep.
well,
Because I can't put
no,
if I put signs in my yard, the KKK will show up and burn my house down. So I had
Bob
I had
had
a
his
crazy
signs taken.
woman follow me home the other day. I something I hadn't mentioned online. I had a woman had some kind of road rage incident, follow me home, and then pull a knife on me while screaming out her car window, waving a sheath knife, not like a pocket knife, but like a sheath knife out her window at me. And I think that's why I
hey,
reminded her this was a stand your ground state. But yeah, this place is full of rage and hate, and so show up and vote and buy the damn book, and that'll give you something to read while you're while you're waiting in line for your polling station. So.
yeah. Well, thank you, Jim, and I appreciate it. And I thank every one of the authors. You can go online pretty soon. I posted a list of all of the authors, and they're every damn one of them
I do
is
live.
has
Sorry to
earned
answer Liam's question. I do live in that part of the Panhandle, Liam. I live in the far western part that is in the Central Time Zone, not the Eastern Time Zone.
Okay. Well, I'm going to let us all go now, and that's for all you people who was worried that I wasn't going to get to say anything. I think I've cured that concern because I'm incapable of keeping my mouth shut for too long. And thank
That's
you
right.
all for signing in. And I'm going to end this now while we're still speaking to each other.